I want to start this review by saying that yes, this is a spoiler review, but I will not be using spoiler footage until I talk about the story, which will be at the timestamp on screen right now. Everything before this will be non-spoilers and talking about the gameplay, systems and mechanics of the game. How do I talk about Spider-Man without first talking about his most famous aspect? Swinging. Swinging in the 2018 game often felt quite limited and somewhat slow, I assume down to the hardware limitations. This isn't the case with Spider-Man 2. The second you gain access to swinging for yourself, in the opening mission you immediately feel just how fast and fluid the swinging is. And the crazy thing is, that's not even the fastest it can get to. The new suit tech system, you can take health, damage, focus and traversal and upgrade them with resources you get by just playing the game. And on the skill tree, you can buy a handful of traversal skills that make swinging around feel even better. My favourite is the loop-de-loop, which is where when you dive by holding left stick in, and when you swing using R2, if you keep holding R2, you'll go around in a loop and gain massive momentum. The swinging is seriously such a massive improvement, and I cannot wait to see how they will improve it in a potential Spider-Man 3. Another big aspect of Spider-Man is fighting criminals. So what's the combat like in this game? It's good. Once again, Insomniac have done such a great job of improving the combat and mechanics and just streamlining it in general. As an example, instead of having 7 gadgets like the first game, which could get finicky to toggle through, you now just have 4 total gadgets, and I actually used all 4 of them. I remember in the first game, I ended up mainly only using 2, maybe 3 gadgets. You have the web shooters, which are pretty much the same as the first game. You web people up and then smash them into a wall and they'll stick to a wall. Pretty standard stuff. Then you have the upshot, which will shoot projectiles at nearby enemies and knock them up into the air for a couple seconds and allow you to perform air combos. The web grabber is kind of the opposite of the upshot. It pulls enemies and nearby objects in, and the objects damage the enemies as if you have thrown them. It's very powerful. Next is the sonic burst. This allows you to knock enemies back. It's very handy if you're stuck in a pinch. You can also use this from a stealth area to lure enemies in and take them down. And finally, the ricochet web. This didn't get much use from me, but if you fire this at enemies, and it pings off a bunch of them and it adds webbing on each hit. It's pretty cool. All of these gadgets can be upgraded to be made even better than what I've listed here. These 4 gadgets always felt like they had a place in combat, no matter who or what I was fighting. And then these can be coupled with the new ability system. Both Miles and Peter have their own ability set, and as you progress through the story, you will unlock new abilities, but there are still a couple that you can buy through the skill tree. And again, all these abilities have a place in the game. You're never forced into 4 specific abilities. They're all good at something. It's nice to have a game with selectable abilities where there's no clear number 1. Sure, some abilities are better than others, but you're going to use them all. Another big addition to the combat is the new parry system, and just blocking in general. Some enemy variants and every boss has attacks that have a ring of gold around the attack, and that will turn red at the last second, indicating that you can parry that attack. Parrying an attack will let you get a combo off. Bosses will eventually break out of the combo, standard enemies won't. Bosses also have a blue glowing circle around unblockable attacks that you will need to dodge at the last second to evade. Which I guess is now a good time to talk about the bosses. I'll only use footage from the lizard boss fight because I know that was footage released before launch. The bosses are a massive improvement over Spider-Man PS4. Bosses in the first game felt very underwhelming and kind of boring mechanic wise. You would spend a lot of time in the first game waiting around for openings on the boss. You never really had any agency of when you could fight the boss. That's not the case in Spider-Man 2. Bosses never have a period of invincibility where you have to do some mechanic to open up a damage phase. The only time they become invincible is for story reasons or transitioning to a new phase, which is completely fine. Every boss, whether they are main story or side quest, are all mechanically distinct from one another. A strategy that works on one boss might not work on another. They're all just fun to fight as well. Let's take Lizard for example. Throughout the fight, he will jump up on the walls and you can either web him up to jump at him to damage him, or when he runs over these square platforms, you can pull on them and knock him down for a free combo. But he also combos you with parry attacks and unblockables. It's a really fun fight overall, and the rest of the bosses in the game are all this high quality. The game also has these set piece moments scattered throughout the city where you chase someone or something, and what do you want me to say? They're fun little contained moments within the game and a nice change of pace. So with all these huge improvements with mechanics and systems for combat, why is Insomniac still gimping the game with absolutely horrendous enemy AI? I don't understand. Bosses are fine AI wise. Even standard enemies are fine when you're fighting 3 to 5 enemies, but the game often dumps you into combat with a large group of enemies, and the game's AI just doesn't seem to know what to do. You get absolutely bombarded with attacks to the point where if you get hit once, you are pretty much stun locked to death. And it's baffling because the exact same thing happened to me in Spider-Man PS4. You would think that improving enemy AI would be a pretty high priority to go alongside all these brand new mechanics and improvements, but clearly not. And while we're on the topic of AI, it is super easy to break enemy AI during the stealth sections. During my first hunter base, for example, I accidentally alerted a bunch of enemies and something like 8 enemies come to my location and I managed to escape. I waited a bit to see if they would return to their original location like they should and would in any other game, and they just didn't. They just stood still below me doing absolutely nothing. So I kind of had no real choice but to go loud and finish the hunter base doing full combat. So please, Insomniac, when you come around to developing Spider-Man 3, please focus on the enemy AI. In my opinion, this is the only thing holding this combat system back from absolute greatness. Before I talk about the story, I want to briefly touch on the side content. Once again, this is all massively improved over the first game. In the first game, you ultimately just did the same thing over and over again, collecting stuff, doing outposts. It eventually got repetitive. The side content in Spider-Man 2, however, is a lot better this time around. There's still things to collect, but it feels like there's less overall side content, like side quests and that, but the quality of it all has skyrocketed. The side missions specifically now have an actual plot running alongside the main story that is just as high quality as the main story itself. Kinda makes me wonder why some of these plot points are even side missions. One of them specifically ends with implications for either a DLC or Spider-Man 3. Either way, side content is good and has a lot of variety in what you're actually doing. Good job here. One last thing before the story. My playthrough was bug-free. I encountered one bug where I unlocked a new ability late into the game, and for some reason it wouldn't let me use the input, and I had to reload a checkpoint which put me back to about 20 seconds prior at that exact point, and that's it. Nothing else happened, bug or issue wise. Now, on to the story. This will be your final warning before I go into my thoughts on the story. If you don't want to see anything from the story section, click off the video or go to the timestamp on the screen. I would maybe split this story into 2 portions. The Kraven half and the Venom half. The first half, or maybe 2/3, Kraven is the primary antagonist, but he doesn't really do anything. He's just a plot device to make sure that all the pieces are in place for the Venom part of the story. He's the reason why Peter takes the symbiote from Harry. He's the reason why Martin Lee escapes from Raft, which eventually leads to him going inside Peter to deal with the symbiote, which gives Peter anti-venom. I expected more from him as an antagonist. Anything that happens in this part of the game is mostly done by his crew. And when Kraven kills, they're all off screen. Apart from one, which is Scorpion, which as far as I can tell from the context is it's just a recording that Peter finds on a computer. You do help some people from the Hunters, namely Black Cat and Lizard. You chase Black Cat for a bit while she's using some Doctor Strange magic to portal hop. Then she teleports herself to Paris and is never heard from again. Then Lizard is almost the same. Dr. Connors gets caught, Kraven injects him with the lizard serum to set him off, then we chase him for a bit to cure him. His boss fight was pretty cool with having to web up the bell so you weren't stun locked. And then when you fight Peter, he will web up the bell so you can't stun him. It's a very cool boss fight, but it's the symbiote storyline where I think the story really picks up and becomes truly interesting. After beating Peter, Miles manages to get the symbiote off him, and they take it back to Harry, who needs it to live. After this point, the story really picks up. But also this entire symbiote storyline is heavily inspired by Donny Cates' 2018 run of Venom, which leads to King in Black. Venom being my favourite character, lore, and that comic storyline being one of my favourites, I might come across as a little bit biased. The rest of the game, Venom is the primary antagonist, and this entire portion starts with playable Venom, which by the way is an absolutely incredible mission. Venom has unique animations, his finishes are brutal as hell, genuinely a highlight of this entire game. This mission ends with Venom versus Kraven, in which Kraven ultimately gets his head bitten off by Venom. It's very brutal, I love it. This starts the whole symbiote invasion portion of the story. This unfortunately doesn't stick around, and I kind of wish Venom and the symbiote storyline was a bit longer. Once Venom playable section ends, you probably have 3, maybe 4 or 5 total story missions left. If we compare this game's story to the King in Black comic, Venom plays the role of Null, of wanting to bring everyone into the hive mind. I think this story is done well considering Null seemingly doesn't exist in Insomniac's universe, and doesn't have the other heroes present like Thor, Silver Surfer, Sentry to fight against him. I think the story has a good amount of fan service too, like Scream for example. That was out of left field and totally unexpected. Carnage pops up in the Flame side quest line too, but the story for that doesn't have an ending. So that's either going to be resolved in a DLC or be a Spider-Man 3 thing. I would have preferred to fight Carnage in Spider-Man 2 base game, but what can you do? One thing that bothers me about Carnage is the way the main story ends. Peter and Miles are beating Venom and he's desperately trying to reach the meteorite. But the destruction of the meteorite is ultimately successful, and all the symbiotes are all destroyed or killed, I guess, by a sonic wave. So unless Carnage is DLC for Spider-Man 2 that's set before the end of the game, I really don't know how Carnage is going to work. But I think overall the story is pretty good. I just wish the Kraven stuff was better. It takes my favourite character Venom and loosely adapts my favourite Venom storyline. What can I say? So this is the end of the review. I don't give scores, but I give a recommendation. If you already own a PS5, I don't see any reason not to pick this up. Maybe wait a while for a little price cut. In the case of not owning a PS5 though, I don't know if I can recommend you pick up a PS5 for this. The game is going to be on PC in under 2 years, and judging by past Sony first party PC releases, the PC version is going to have many improvements over the PS5 version.